Bam.
This is Dean Butler, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
This is great, man. I love it. I love that we get to do these things and have these conversations. You and I both know Allison, and she's been on the show, and I've been on her show. So I'm sort of in the family. Not only that, but the folks that run that Cherry Blossom Festival out there in Missouri. I know those guys too. You know.
Oh boy, yeah. That's a little slice of that's a slice of Americana that's very unusual. That's one of the more unusual events that I've ever been to in terms of its scope of people that go there. You know, it's a very interesting mixture of people.
Yeah, and sort of down there, well, not far at all from Mansfield, and the ancestral home of Laura Ingalls Wilder and the guy that you played.
Yeah,
Little House in the Prairie. Almanzo
it's
Wilder.
It's the mothership, no question. Mansfield is the mothership of Little House.
You know, it seems like when you have people who are around for Old Settlers Day, up north and everything, and then Laura and Almanzo lived for a long time. It seems like that's a long, long time ago, but really, it's just not. I mean, she dies in 49 or something like that?
No, actually, no. She
59.
She died in 50, and I think in 57 is what? No, 59. Yeah. Let's see. No,
right around that time.
1957.
Yeah. And then Almanzo, the guy that you played on Little House, he dies basically 10 years before.
Wait a minute, Pete. You've got me wondering about it now. Do I have to get out and Google this? I hate getting that wrong.
Well, let's not get it wrong. I'll do the Googling.
Late 50s is when she passed. Late 50s.
Yeah, late 50s. Their daughter passes in 69, I think. Like it was also like every 10 years we lost one of them.
Yeah.
It's just not that long ago,
No,
I mean,
no, it's not.
It's an amazing story. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. When you think that Laura began her life crossing the country in a covered wagon and finished her life flying cross country on an airplane, on a commercial airliner, she lived through some of the most extraordinary advances in sort of human technology ever, in sort of this big incremental sense. I mean, from no flight to commercial flight, we're seeing these huge growths in technology and what we have access to. But when you think of horse and buggy to the automobile to the simplest airplane all of these things that she saw, and the very beginnings of the space program with the first rockets going up and so on, it's pretty remarkable what she saw.
Yeah. And we're going to slide over to Almanzo and your book and everything else. But when you think about, like, her dad is born in the 1830s, I believe. I just checked while you were talking. So you're right. Almanzo is 49, 57 for Laura, 59 for Rose. So 69 for Rose. So these are all, like, look, within my lifetime. I was born in 70, so I didn't quite touch that point, but there's not much difference. But also the thousands and thousands of kids that wrote letters to Laura Ingalls Wilder, and she wrote back. It's crazy.
She was very committed that way, and I think that the sense I have, Pete, is that Laura was so grateful for all of this that happened. I mean, for her, would you think that she didn't publish, her books weren't published until she was in her 60s. She had been writing for newspapers and journals and so forth prior to that, but she did not have this long writing career, and so for her to have had this happen when it did, it's just extraordinary. And of course, as we've come to know, her daughter Rose had a huge impact on how the books came together, and then of course Rose, because she inherited all the books from her mother, and then she bequeathed all of those rights to her attorney, and who she called her step-grandson, Roger Lee McBride. That's what led it directly to television. That connection between Rose and Roger McBride was what what brought it to TV. So these things happened relatively quickly once it started to move in that direction.
Let's actually talk about you for a little bit. So, but it is important to recognize just that time. I think this is still true that one of, it's going to fail me now. John Tyler, President Tyler's grandkids are still alive. I know until recently there were two. And if it's not John Tyler, then it's further back. But Van Buren, Martin Van Buren. I think that's who it is. Okay. One of his actual grandkids, not great grandkids. I think one of them is still left. Wow. That's how young as a nation we are. And that dude was president before all of that. So it's an amazing.
Yeah.
You go ahead.
No. I just, thinking about just jumping back to the Cherry Blossom Festival that we started with, going there and meeting the grandson of, immediately following Roosevelt.
Truman?
Truman, yes, President Truman's grandson, and meeting the granddaughter of President Eisenhower, and we have this long connection with people who have been influential in our country, and places like the Cherry Blossom Festival in Marshfield are a place where those people come together, and you celebrate the goodness of the country, regardless of political affiliation. You're celebrating the goodness of the country and leadership and what the country means to people beyond the policy. And I think it's very helpful and positive to be able to do that.
So I looked it up while you were talking again too. So it's John Tyler, who was president in the 1840s, has one grandkid left. And now, granted, he had a long life, had a lot of kids. Wow. His son, long life, a lot of kids late in life. And so there's a little, but it is possible right now to say that this is true, that John Tyler's grandkid in his 90s, but he is still with us. And so it is.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing that John Tyler could father a child that could get him a living grandson. I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah.
Okay, in your career, you played on shows
a much shorter career.
A
much
shorter
career.
It counts. You still did it.
Me.
I was just going to say, you impacted me as a kid. I mean, just thinking in general about, and I will ask the other question later, but when I grew up, and I'm a little bit younger than you, like a full class generation younger, and so there was a reading program, at least here in California, where they would hand you the script for the week for a show. It could be The Incredible Hulk. It could be Little House on the Prairie. It could be The Waltons. White Shadow was one of them. So you would flip through and you would read out loud as a reading program, right? And I'm impacted by the dude that you were, because it's like a role model. Like, that's a guy I can look up to, kind of like an uncle almost. Because when you're that age, and I'm born in 70, you're really impressionable. And I think that show was great. You did such a great job of being someone who I wanted to be. I wanted to be tough and able to get things done. And you weren't like I'm going to beat up people, but you had this really powerful character. Yeah.
Well, that's very, Almanzo was a very earnest young man, coming from a hardworking background. There was good principle there, good values. All of that was a part of his being. And then, of course, actors pick up on. I mean, actors always are bringing themselves to situations. I mean, that's sort of the magic of the casting process. Is someone is deciding, the casting director and ultimately the producers are deciding what is the presence we want this particular character to have. I had conversations with our casting director, Susan Sukman, as I was, during this last year, and talking about what were the important things that you were looking for, not only in my casting, but in everybody's casting? And really the thing that came up more often than not is that Susan was always looking for people who would fit into this world, this Walnut Grove, Little House, period world, and be believable in that world. You know, there are actors that we all know and love that are very much creatures of contemporary culture. They are modern people, and no matter what part you put them in, they are always modern people. There's something in their speech pattern, their appearance that radiates modern. There are other actors who feel like they have come from another time, and when you put them in that other time, it just fits very naturally for them to be that. And I think that's sort of who I was in the situation. I think I was very much raised to be this guy. And you don't know that when you're going into rooms to read and meet people for parts. But I've long said, Pete, that people get the parts, actors get the parts they're supposed to get. And you know, parts choose actors. It's in most cases. There are situations, depending on the actor, where the actor can choose the part. But generally, the parts choose the actor. And you have to, you walk in with something that the person who is making those decisions looks at, sees, feels that organically, and they make this decision very quickly. This is like an 8-second decision. This is that you're right or you're not right. How right you are may be determined with further conversation. But people know instantly if you could be the guy or the girl in it for a particular part. And it's just very much, you know, human beings, we all make dozens of assessments about the people we meet the second we meet them. And we may be wrong. Doesn't mean we're right about the assessments we make, but we make very fast assessments about people, and it's very hard to change our minds on those assessments. And because we are intuitive creatures, we see and hear and feel what's coming off of somebody, and you make decisions based on that about who they are. So for casting directors, they know that not only are they making that decision, they're making that decision for themselves, but they're making those decisions for potentially millions of people who are watching these programs. Certainly in that era, not uncommon to have audiences of 15 to 20 plus million people a week. You're making a lot of judgment that has a lot of impact on the success on the audience appeal and success of a program. So these were very important jobs, and I just always say to people, Pete, and I feel this profoundly. I feel so fortunate that for whatever things that I projected walking in the door, I am so grateful that it was a positive and a good match for what Little House was. Because the show just goes on. Here we are celebrating 50 years now.
Crazy.
The show
That's crazy.
The show just goes on and on and on.
Yeah, I'm so glad you talked about that, because one of the things that I've learned from this show is when you are an actor who's employable. There's all kinds of actors. You kind of mentioned this earlier, the size of the actor, but an actor who gets roles, who is able to portray the thing that they need. That means you've probably auditioned quite a bit. And you may not get the first 40 or 100 or however many auditions it takes, but at some point they're like, you know what? I know who we need. Let's get Dean Butler in here. I think he'd be perfect for this. And so the part has already started to choose you. Maybe there's 15 other Dean Butlers that are in the room, and that for sure happens. I've been in those rooms with my friends who've tried out for parts and everything. But if you're seasoned, you know, like this is part of the deal, right? And you also know that your agent has said, hey, go to this thing. they got their eye on you because they've done their job. So is that sort of the path on how this gets to you? We're like, hey, Dean, here's a good one, and I think that they have their eye on you, or what was that?
Well, I think in the very beginning, I mean, look, I had done one large piece of work in advance of Little House. It was, a movie of the week for CBS this was essentially a similar character. This was based on Judy Blume's novel Forever. I did this opposite Stephanie Zimbalist back in the, late 70s, 1977. That was out there, which got me the right agent. And agents are gatekeepers, as are casting directors. And you want to be, if you are a young actor in the community, you want to be with a gatekeeper, an agent, whose company or whose force of personality puts the parts that they are pitching for at the highest possible level. There are agencies that specialize in or that represent the talent that goes in for the biggest parts, and there are agencies that represent the talent that tends to go in for the medium-sized parts, the supporting parts, and those under 5 parts, of which there are many out there. So having the agent that has the access to the larger parts is a huge thing. Now, when I got Forever, I was with a regional agent in San Francisco who represented the whole spectrum of talent in the San Francisco Bay Area. When I came to Southern California, because of Forever, I was able to sign with an agent that represented top tier talent. So immediately that put me in rooms that a different kind of agent never could have gotten me into. So that was that was an incredibly fortunate thing. Now look, you said something earlier that was absolutely true. You could go in for 20, 30, 40 parts and nothing happens. I mean, over the course of a career, probably the average working actor over the course of a career may get 5% of what they audition for. Now, if you become really successful, that percentage can rise pretty dramatically. But for your working actor, 5% is about where that is, and that puts you in pretty rarefied territory. Because these jobs, there are people who are very talented, who work so hard, and they rarely, if ever, get any opportunity. Maybe they're getting 1% of what they go up for. They're getting 2%. I don't know. I mean, I think it's very challenging to stick at that point. You have to be getting enough encouragement to say, I have a shot at making a living at this. And I feel very fortunate that for 20 years I was able to make a living as an actor, which is, and get the credits to qualify for a pension and all of that. I feel very, very fortunate that I had that level of success. And that is a relatively small number compared to those who try, and so I really sort of, think, wow, was I very fortunate to, and a lot of that, it comes off your representation. It comes off the thing that you did before that leads you to the next thing. And there's no guarantee that any of this works for anybody. There is a good deal of serendipity that works in all of this for people.
Yeah. And it goes in eras and tranches. And so this era's plan is totally obsolete to the next one. I mean, I've talked with a lot of actors who are like, you can't follow my path. It doesn't exist anymore. And I don't know how I made it. Like there's so much of that where they, how they get the part, how the part finds them is they end up doing something and it's like, oh, you act, oh great, or you live across the street from me. It's like that's when the serendipity jumps in. I want to ask you about this.
Wow.
You play these roles, Judy Blume, right? Hyper influential for the youth of the latter part of the 20th century. Hyper important. Powerful female characters like Stephanie Zimbalist in that. I mean, I remember this show, Gidget, right? You're in there where you have this very modern representation of a lady. You're in this program as well, and of course, I mean, I don't know if there's anybody who's more. I mean, Almanzo, and when he was born and how he respects Laura, it seems like you're built for those kind of parts as well, as like you can say, this is a powerful woman. I know how to be a man, but let her be herself. And I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm making too much of that.
No, I don't think so at all, Pete. I think that's really insightful. I was raised in a family, in a very strong matriarchal family with a great deal of respect for the women that were raising me. So I have always had this, I think, look, I can't say where I fall on the spectrum of, men who are highly respectful of women. But that's my orientation. First, I see, I was raised to respect what women brought to the table in terms of having a successful family. And stepping into the world of Little House, it's women who really ensured the settling of America. It's not, men went out on their horses and with their guns, and they fought the battles and they did all that. But the only reason they stayed anywhere is because of their women and children. That's why they stayed. Otherwise, a lot of men might have kept moving. That was one of the wonderful story points in Little House with Charles Ingalls, who had eternal wanderlust. He would have kept moving. Finally, it was Caroline who said, we're going to stop moving. We need to stay somewhere and build a life for our children. And it's women, I think, historically, and maybe not exclusively in that, but women create the need. Women bring the need for roots. They bring the need for stability and in their raising of children, and obviously children. That role has altered and changed and evolved through the years, but you still, in order to be successful at that, have to find yourself in a place where you are going to commit to being for a period of time so that your children can be raised in some environment where there's consistency. I grew up in an environment where I went to school. I graduated from high school with the same core of people I started kindergarten with. And that was my life, and I'm very fortunate for that. And look, it wasn't necessarily that these were always perfect relationships, but there was a group of people that I grew up with where we got to grow up together, and we experienced things together. And because of that, there's I don't know if you could, I don't think that kids necessarily put it in the form of thinking about it in terms of trust, but you knew who you were with. You knew who you were growing up with. You knew their families knew your family. So there's a certain safety in all that. I feel very fortunate that I had that. So many kids do not have that today. I did have it, and it shaped me. It made me who I am. It made me the guy who, when I walked in the room to meet with Susan Sukman and later with Michael Landon, that whether they knew nothing about my life biography, but you bring these things in the room with you when you come, and you don't know that you're bringing it. It's not something you're conscious about. You're just bringing it. It's that essence of who you are that comes in the door with you, and people see it or they don't see it. But if they see it, they get it, and that becomes the thing that that becomes the thing that drives their decision making about whether you're the right guy for their show.
When you think about a place like De Smet in the
yes.
mid-late 1800s, right?
Yes.
I've been I will say the word. This is very much on topic when people criticize the Ingalls Wilder for, but there's nobody there. Like there's just nobody there. There's not even, you couldn't even fill a small high school with the amount of people that lived there in 1890 after it had had over 10 years to blossom into something. This is a very hard to get place. And so when Almanzo, and I don't know how much you've read the different texts in the books, and again, who knows when the fiction starts and the truth stops and those things. But
as Laura said, that my books are the truth, but not all the truth. Is what Laura said.
Exactly, yeah.
About them. So there was more to this than perhaps what was on the page of her books. But the essence is right. But go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
Well, the courting process, right? And so back then, the age gap between these two, or maybe it's inappropriate, maybe not. I don't know. But when you look around,
not in the time.
There's only
not
4.
in the time. It wasn't
right. Yeah. And he goes to great lengths to make sure that Laura is taken care of as she's stepping out to become a teacher and, writing. I mean, we don't understand how cold it was just to survive back then.
I can't even imagine. I think I was near De Smet, a decade ago shooting something. It was January. I have never felt cold like that in my life. Stepping out of my nicely heated SUV to shoot something and feeling this blast of cold go right through every bit of insulated clothing I had on, cutting me to the bone with cold. How any of these people survived that in those times. It is absolutely staggering to me how they, and it's no wonder that, look, the mortality rate was very high in that time. The things that people had to live through and overcome, and I think the Ingalls family as a family really struggled. I mean, they suffered from malnutrition. Laura is the only daughter who reproduced in the family, and she tried to do it twice, was successful once. And so many, they were just hungry all the time. And how they overcame all that and managed just to survive themselves, much less, I mean, it's understandable. Well, they were little people. I mean, Laura stood maybe 5 feet. Almanzo stood maybe 5'6", 7". Something like that. I mean, now when we see people and they walk in the room and everyone's 6 feet or 6'5" or whatever they are, that's a direct connection to nutrition. And when we think, we eat a lot of processed food and we eat a lot of things that aren't necessarily good for us, but we're eating a lot of calories. We get, if you want it, they may not be the most healthy calories, but you're getting a lot of calories and people grow. In that era, in Laura's time, a lot of deprivation going on, and the weather's a part of it. Just the rugged land. Thinking about, think how the U.S. government, with the Homestead Act, thought we're going to send people out into the Midwest, do plots of land. We're going to ask them to plant trees so we can forest this part of the country because there just aren't enough trees there. We can change that. We can get people to grow. Well, nice try, a nice idea, but the land simply wasn't going to support that. There wasn't enough rain there to support that kind of. Now, you go to De Smet, you go to Walnut Grove, you go to these places. There are places where trees grew, and the shade that you get there during the summers because it's very hot. You're lucky to get that shade, and they're beautiful trees. But the whole idea of foresting the Midwest was a dismal failure. It just wasn't possible to do it. Very tough life. Very tough life. I would never trade Pete, I would never trade the life we have today for the life the Ingalls family lived then. And you know, we just don't get those. It's nice. We have that, you know, we have that hindsight. We could look at that, but none of us get to choose that stuff. We are when we are, and we have to either make the best, we make the best of it, or we don't. And they came into the world, well, for them, it was the best time to ever be alive in the world. Comparatively, I don't know that I would trade it. What I do love about their life, as much as it was hard, and as you read Laura's books, you get a sense of this, that there is a rhythm to the life that they lived, that they had to do certain things at certain times today so that they would have something a month from now, 6 months from now, a year from now. You know, that's so different from our life now, where we can walk into a store if we have the money. We can walk into a store and get anything we need virtually anytime. And if the local store doesn't have it, we go online to Amazon and they ship it to us and we have it 2 days from now. We could be very spontaneous in our thinking. They did not have that kind of spontaneity available to them. They had to be very intentional. And in some ways that's rugged, but it's also it's simpler in some ways too, because you have to do it. You do not have a huge menu of options. If you expect to survive, you have to do things at certain times. And we have a lot of freedom today that they didn't have.
Yeah. So I want to say one thing. Your mic seems to be resting on your zipper or something. So when you
perfect. Well, let's see if I can. Sorry about that. Let me just see if I can.
That's all right. I've been trying to figure out what it was. When you lean forward, it sounds better. So,
okay.
Just a little live production note.
Yeah. Thank you. I should have the boom over my head, and I don't have that. I'm going to change up this system.
Yeah, it's no big deal. And this is a theory on why there was some crackling. Let's forget all that stuff. I want to get back into this because we opened this talking a little bit about the age difference, and you still have a similar age difference when you're acting. And look, there's acting, and then there's, you know, being a dude that has to figure out how to kiss a very young little girl when you're in your 20s. So how does that translate to real life today?
Well, I think that in terms of today, I don't think there was ever a casting matchup like Melissa and I did that preceded that. There certainly has not been one like that followed us. And I would say in the culture as we live in it today, there's no way that casting would be done today. It simply would not be possible to do that casting today. There would be way too many restrictions. I think the only reason I think that we were able to do it is because NBC had such faith, or whether it was faith or just saying, you know, if Michael Landon's going to do this, he's going to do it. And we're not going to question him because he's a force of nature. He has the Midas touch. Whatever he does works. Let's just stay away from this and let this happen. But I think Michael took a real gamble with this, but I think he also understood what was needed to make it palatable. They were never going to hire that, you know, if there is such a thing as a 23-year-old lady killer. You know, that was not going to be the guy they were going to hire for this. They needed, it always had to, the audience never could feel that Laura was in any sort of jeopardy or that she was in over her head. She may have thought that she, you know, wanted this great romance, but if the character had been written to respond to that in any way until it was time to say, I love you, I want to marry you, that would have been completely unacceptable. I mean, we got letters. I got letters as the actor. I got some letter from a mother who wrote to me and said, how can I teach my daughter's values about waiting for when the time is right? And she's talking about having 13, 14, 15-year-old daughters when here you are paired up with 15-year-old Melissa Gilbert on this show. This is not the example I'm trying to set for my children. Well, I had nothing to, I had no effect on that personally, but I mean, all I could do was be, now I will tell you, Pete, that was a rare letter. That's the only letter like that I ever got. NBC may have gotten other letters like that, but I only saw the one letter like that. And, Melissa remembers it as being, look, it was tough for her. It was awkward for her. She didn't know quite how to play this because she didn't have any of that life experience. But, her recollection of this was that we did okay. We feel good about what we did. And the audience, I mean, if it had been really in some way uncomfortable to watch, the audience would have the audience would, critics would have commented on it. There would have been some blowback. With 20 million people a week watching, there would have been some blowback. But we didn't really get anything like that. What people accepted it because of the way that it was done. It was simple and chaste and romantic in the sweetest, most benign way. And that's what it needed to be in order to work. It could not have been in any way overt, with Melissa being just 15 years old and me, towering over her by a foot, outweighing her by 80-something pounds. I mean, that just would not have worked at all. And that wouldn't have worked at any time. So, it was a function of Michael's way of doing it. He hired me because he sensed I was going to be a gentleman about all this, which, given the way I was raised, I was absolutely going to be a gentleman. And look, I'm not going to sit here and say in my dealings with young women throughout my life that I was always perfect, because I wasn't. I acted out on occasion, not some things I'm not proud of, but overall, those were very rare circumstances that happened. Generally, always in my head were the messages I got at home from my mother and my grandmother and my aunts and my sister, that women were to be respected. And that's what I came into this situation with. That was the dominant guiding principle that ruled everything I was doing. So that's what made it okay, I think. And look, Melissa was very brave. Melissa, even at 15 years old, was a feisty, gutsy young woman. And she had this very simple look. I mean, there was nothing flamboyant about her at all. But Melissa had an inner core of courage and conviction that made it possible for her to do any of this. I think a lot of young actresses, if they were not as strong as she was at that time, might have folded under all of this. There was no fold in Melissa. She was all in, and she was going to be the Laura that she needed to be in order to make this work. And I did my part in that, and she did her part in that. And in the end, we came out okay at the far end of it. And the fact that people keep watching the program, loving the program, women approach me all the time, telling me about the beautiful romance that they love between Laura and Almanzo. I think, we did okay. Internally, it may have been uncomfortable at times because of the age difference, but we pulled it off well enough for the majority of the audience to feel like, okay, these two people belong together. This works for us. And I'm very grateful for that.
Do you recall who specifically directed and or wrote that episode, and what was their impact on how the two of you performed it?
Are you talking about the Sweet 16 episode, the Kiss episode?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, that was Michael's script.
It was, okay.
Yeah, no, that was Michael's script, and Michael directed it too.
Right.
So, and Michael rewrote every script. You know, he was the polish on every script that was done on Little House, and he was the writer of record on 60 something, I think around 60 episodes during the life of the series. But his mindset, his thinking touched every single script that was done, going right back to the pilot. He had, you know, he would have put his stamp on that, given who he was, what he believed, what his sensibilities were. So, and he was a wonderful director to work with. He understood the camera. He certainly understood how to work with actors. He had a sense of rhythm and pacing and a visual style that was very compelling and beautiful for our show. And he surrounded himself with incredibly talented people behind the camera who were able to help him actualize this vision he had for the show. He was absolutely brilliant at it. Yeah. And, you know, Little House was the ideal or a vision of family that Michael, I think, dreamed of having himself as a kid. He did not have that as a kid. He grew up in a very tough circumstances with, you know, two parents that really didn't like each other and didn't communicate very well. I mean, Michael developed his own set of coping and survival skills because of that were very important to him in his life. And it worked for him. I mean, he could have turned out very differently than he did, given the upbringing he had. But he wanted to turn, I think Michael was committed to turning his upbringing into something beautiful for people. And
mission accomplished.
Yeah. Yeah, no question.
Yeah. You know, we got to do a little bit of work here. Everybody, look down below me. There's a link, and you can want to get Prairie Man, My Life, My Little House, Life, and Beyond. Well, there's the Amazon link. It comes out in June. You can get in pre-sales now. Wherever you buy the book, go buy it at a local bookstore and pre-order it there. But you hear the words of Dean. And here's the other thing. You guys all know how to say this. Buddy, read this. Buy one for you. Buy one for your friend. And read it together. And there's the link right down there in the comments. If you look over there, you probably can click on it. It's fantastic. I love this whole universe. As an adult, I've been reading through Laura's books and the books about Laura. I mean, this intrepid lady gets into an open car with her daughter and her other lady friend and drive across the damn country, off-roading all the way out to San Francisco. Like, this is just a remarkable. It blows me away when we look at. And I guess I want to talk a little bit about this part too. When the precious ones among us want to dig up Laura Ingalls Wilder and scold her and be like, hey, you're a bad person. Then you read the body of work and you're like, oh, come on. I mean, this is very rare did you have an actual person who's a pioneer write about that experience. And like all of us, there are missteps. There's missteps in the life then. There's missteps when you write it. Right. You know, and if you take one line out of context, I just think it's unfair. I don't want to load this up too much for you, but this is an incredible person, an incredible American who does show us all of these things. Yeah. And I think we're all better for it.
Yeah, I think that what you're suggesting, and I totally agree with you, Pete, I think that rather than, and look, we're doing this throughout all over our culture, where we are attempting to, thinking that we're doing a good thing for children, erasing points of view that are not in keeping with what we think the world should be today. And I think we're taking away context from all of these things. Laura wrote of her mother in Little House on the Prairie about her fear of Native Americans. She writes about that. That was for Native Americans, young Native American kids reading these books. That was a painful thing for them to read. I get that. But Laura, in the very same book, talks about how her father had great empathy for Native Americans. And Laura loved looking at the children doing the Native American children doing what they're doing, and loved their art and so on. There was perspective here, but Laura was giving voice to something that her mother was experiencing at that time. Doesn't make it right, doesn't make it wrong. It does make it what it was at the time. And I think we've evolved beyond that thinking. And I think that to not use these things as teaching moments is a mistake. To show where we've come. In Little Town on the Prairie, Laura writes about a blackface minstrel show. You know, that was in its time when this happened, those things happened. They don't happen today. And it would be great to be able to say, as we've read this, and as the child asks the question, what is a blackface minstrel show? That a parent can be present enough to be able to say, that was something that we don't do anymore. Look where we've come from that moment. And look, people may not like this when I say what I'm about to say. I think all of this book banning and control of content for children today is really a reflection of parental cowardice more than anything else. Is people don't want to deal with issues. They're looking to duck answering questions, not thinking or not considering that their children are eventually going to go out in the world when they're 18, 19, 20 years old. Nothing that's being withheld today will ultimately be withheld in the long run. Kids are going to get everything, but they won't have necessarily the advantage of having perspective on those issues offered to them when they're children and can learn tolerance, understanding, context, a balanced view of the world. Instead, they're going to be assaulted with.
There's an earthquake right now.
Older. Or you
there was just an earthquake here.
Where are you, Pete?
Orange County.
Oh, you're in Orange County? I didn't feel so. I'm 30 miles up the coast. I didn't feel anything.
Well, I'm telling you right now, there was just like about a 4-second earthquake. I had to put my hand on the books up here to make sure they wouldn't fall.
Well, maybe it's maybe I'm going to a 5'5".
I'm guessing. And look, I'm not a seismographer. I just know that like the length and a little bit of up and down shaking.
Wow.
So,
wow. Anyway, that's
that was not to get applause. Laura's applause. That's what that was.
Okay. Or that was, how dare he say that? I don't know. I grew up in a family where my mother sat us down as children and had all those really delicate conversations with us. And sometimes we were ready for those conversations, sometimes we weren't, but we got a sense of the world and our own humanity at an age when we could start to process these things. There were no shocks when we got older and went out into the world. We knew what was coming at us. We understood our own humanity. And I think that's look, Laura, jumping back to Laura was not spilling out all of these things for everybody. And yet she writes about nature and farm animals and all these things. And you get a sense that there is truth and reality in all this. She writes about a blackface minstrel show. We don't do that anymore, but she did do that in her time. And to sweep that away and say, well, we can't talk about that. We can't acknowledge that that happened because that doesn't reflect well on us is really missing the whole point. We have evolved. We have traveled some distance culturally. And I think as young people should have the opportunity to see where we've come from and be able to ask questions about it without fear of their parents losing their minds because they have to address something that is maybe uncomfortable for them. Yeah. I just think it's really, I'm sorry, I'm a little strong on this. I just think it's a little cowardly, frankly. And you're not doing their children any favors.
Yeah, and if you didn't have Laura's voice, how would you explain this path? And I think about the context thing is important. We tend to wrap all of these big concepts up into, a talking point. But if you read, and I don't know if you're familiar with Wilhelm Moberg's books, The Immigrants, and all the other.
I'm not.
He writes about what it's fictionalized, but it is the story of the Swedes who pick up the ad and go, Minnesota, huh? Okay, let's try that.
Yeah,
and then insanity,
and they did, and they're still there.
And you're like,
lots of Swedes in Minnesota. Yeah,
that journey was perilous, dangerous. Half of them die in a boat, and everything. So it's crazy. And by the way, that earthquake was just southwest of Corona, almost, kind of right where I am.
Okay,
4.3 USGS, real breaking news. Yeah,
breaking news.
Wow. Okay. But that context to go out and read those stories, and let's read multiple sides, and you will be able to say this is what it was like back then. To be able to contextualize history and let it inform you and improve the person that you are. That's important. When I look at my own ancestry, my great grandfather, one of them, and his dad came here from Sweden. And they had rocky, crappy farmland. It was never going to improve for them. And so they came out here to a place that had rocky, crappy, swampy farmland. And ultimately they left there. And they said, you know what? We still like parts of Minnesota, but we also like Texas. We also like South Carolina. We went everywhere, right? Because that was the thing. And the journey, same thing for Laura, was not going to be simple. And that's really the big thing. When you read Little House on the Prairie, at least the early books, it's like, on Monday we did this, on Tuesday we did this, and then you needed a dang day of rest. It might have been boring, but
yes.
Wow,
I love it though. I love the way she wrote. I love the way she wrote it in Farmer Boy, where no one could do anything on Sunday but sit and listen to the ticking clock. And it just like after church, you came home and you had your big meal of the day, and you were not allowed to do anything.
Yeah.
And that, in some ways, I mean, what a blessing that was, to have this time that people have decided is a time for rest and contemplation. Now, as a 9-year-old boy, how much contemplation are you doing? But for the adults, that had to be a very wonderful time to have, where they knew they had an opportunity to shut it down for a few hours. And even in that shutdown, they still have to feed the stock. They still have to pump the water. They still have to do, nothing really stopped, but the larger tempo of their farming life could slow down on a Sunday to give them a chance to rest and recharge a little bit, which is a really nice thing to be able to do. We don't get enough rest and recharge time. We live in this 24-hour cycle, and look, it is what it is. It's what our life is, and if people can carve out that time to shut it down, good for them. But it's hard to shut it down. I mean, you're hearing, we read stories now about companies that are now saying, or it's become a deal to say companies cannot communicate with you on email after business hours.
Yeah.
I've never worked for anybody where they couldn't communicate with me any time of the day or night. And I sort of welcomed that communication because it showed that we were doing things. But there is a value in being able to shut it down for a while and just be with yourself, be with your loved ones, and have life be able to be simpler for a few minutes, or a few hours at a time on a given day. I think that's special and important and pays dividends for people.
You could do work in the Little House universe as an actor, and who knows, maybe there'll be another project at some point. But did you realize when you stepped into this, and granted, Michael Landon was a megastar, but he became mega after because of Little House. And then, oh, by the way, the next show does great. So we can't forget like the time in those mid-'70s when this thing was really getting big. Yeah. Did you know that you were going to belong to this show, not the other way around, for the next 50 years?
Yeah, no, I no idea. When Michael said to me one day, between scenes, between shots, he said, people are going to be watching this long after we're all gone. And at the time, that felt like hyperbole. I just didn't. I was 25 years old. It's just like that's not possible. Now, at nearly 68 years old, it's. I get that that's totally possible now, and it has been the gift of my life to be associated with this, because because Pete, it touches something so fundamental and basic in people.
Is this your purpose? Is this why you were made?
Well,
saying that?
you know, it's certainly, it's not, it wouldn't be a bad purpose if that's what the purpose was. You know, I'm not
Yeah.
prepared to say it was my purpose, but it really has been so much of the focus of my life, and representing it well has been very, very important to me. You know, I always feel like when we go out and do personal appearances, and this year we're doing a lot of appearances
Yeah.
related to the show, I always feel very strongly that I want people to come away from those interactions feeling like they've met the person that they've watched on television for the last 40 plus years. And obviously an older version of that person, but nonetheless, it's very important to me that people feel like they are getting what they're expecting. And that it's been a gift to me to be able to represent what I represented. I want people who meet me to feel like, yeah, this was real and genuine for him, and it was real and genuine for me. It's those values are the values that we were presenting in the program are very much in sync with how I was raised and how I would like to occur in the world. It's really, really important. I make no apologies for it, and I have no regrets on that at all. I feel so fortunate that I was able to be part of this very special piece of television history.
I want to sneak in one more fun question, and I have to ask because I don't know that I probably have had someone on the show who was on Love Boat. But Love Boat is such a great premise for a show because you get to bring all these people. You're like, oh my god, oh my Charo.
Well, Aaron Spelling built his entire company around this idea of stunt casting, with Love Boat, with Fantasy Island, with Hotel. Aaron Spelling owned ABC for more than a decade with all the things that he was making.
Yeah.
It was fun for people for audiences to be able to see their favorites who played other characters come on and do a little romance or a comedy or whatever that was. Yeah. These were Love Boat and Fantasy Island and Hotel. I mean, Hotel probably dealt with more adult themes than perhaps than Fantasy Island did and that Love Boat did. But it was all about, a kind of fun escapism where you got to see people do something that they weren't normally doing. So yeah, those were fun things. I haven't seen any of those shows in years. I know like Love Boat was carved up into half hours. It was syndicated as a half hour, but I don't know how it works as a half an hour. It was written to be hours, and how you cut that up would be a really interesting challenge for a producer to do that and reshape it. But fun shows. I mean, fun shows. Nothing earth-shattering there. Not important television, but a nice, fun escape on a Saturday night.
If you go down to Cabo San Lucas and you stay down there and the Princess Cruisers show up, it is true that one of those boats, at least once during your stay, will blow the first few bars of the theme song on their ship's horn.
That's fun.
It is super fun. And you're looking out, you're like, oh, the moon, and it's so good.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. That's very cool. Yeah. I've only been on one, none of the Love Boats I did were actual cruises. They were all on the stage, which vast majority of the shows were. I've been on one cruise, a short cruise, like that Cabo San Lucas kind of cruise. I loved it. I can't get Catherine to get on a ship and go somewhere, but I think it will be fun. I have a friend who just came back from like a 18-day tour to Antarctica and a cruise through Antarctica and South America and all that. Yeah. Absolutely loved it. These ships are so beautifully put together and do such incredible service now. I think it'll be fun. I have to convince Catherine that this is something that we should do.
Well, listen, one thing I want to do is I need to thank you for coming on. It's been an absolute kick, and I think it's great. And I can't wait to get my hands on the book. I love everything about that whole universe. You know, I haven't read all of the Laura's Ingalls Wilder universe of books, but there are so many of them.
There are a lot.
Yeah, and it just, you know, it just puts you in the mindset of what that time was like. We'll see what happens, but I'm trying to make a documentary, maybe even a film about one of the earliest prize fights in the 1800s in California. And when you realize just how hard everything was back then, you know, it's an amazing story. So I'm super glad you shared it with us, and I'm really glad you wrote the book. Anything you want to say in closing before I push the credits button?
Well, you know, you could run the credits over the last comment. I'm just appreciative of you for having me on, Pete. Thank you for inviting me to speak about Little House, about my book, about a little bit about life as a whole. You know, all of this is fun to do. And if people decide they want to pick up the book and read it, I'll be very grateful for that.
Yeah, definitely get that book. Stand by. I'll say bye to you. I'll be right back to you. Hold on. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours